Welcome to Have You Heard, where we talk about issues at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. This is episode 42. We're going to talk today a little bit about our hay quality and sort of our feeding strategies this winter. Since we missed our fall episodes, we're going to sort of double back and talk a little bit about hay quality. I'm Morgan Hayes. I'm an assistant professor in Biosystems and Ag Engineering here at the University of Kentucky, focusing on livestock facilities. And in my personal life, I farm with my husband in Boyle County, Kentucky, and we farm about 500 acres. It's a commercial cattle and hay operation.
And I'm Josh Jackson, assistant professor in Biosystems and Agriculture Engineering as well. And I focus on precision livestock farming. And for my operation, or family's operation, we focus in Mercer County on raising registered Angus cattle, some goat production, and producing hay.
Okay, Josh. So before we get into our topic, hay quality, let's talk a little bit about how the last week has gone.
It's been kind of interesting for the past week. So I was out for the weekend. I had a little bit of eye surgery going on, so we're correcting some things. So I was kind of down for the count. My other brother Joey, he was down for the count. His wife was having a baby, so Katie had a baby, so that put him out for the count. And then Justin, he was pretty much, I guess, the lone warrior this past weekend. So he didn't quite get bulls taken care of. He got some goats moved, and he was just doing what he can and
making sure everything got fed.
Making sure pretty much you spend half a day putting out hay, then the other half, moving goats and this and that. So it's pretty much that was the whole weekend. Yeah. How about you? It was just a little bit of pandemonium. It wasn't quite what we expected.
We also failed to get our bull out this past week. I'm ashamed to say, although it's just the reality. We have a rented farm, and we've talked about it before, and that makes it more difficult because you don't have the latitude necessarily to do a lot of infrastructure projects, and that farm doesn't have great catching facilities, and pushing up a bull, especially by itself, really requires pretty good capture facilities, and this one did not hold up to the bull. So that was a fail. Many hours of my life are now gone forever. But aside from that, generally a lot of feeding, things like that. My husband's been traveling for work. So like your brother, I was a lone warrior for part of the weekend and then early this past week. So, and that's okay. It just takes more practice. So that's what we were working on this past week, was planning out how we were putting hay out, making my workload manageable for me to do alone with small children and everything else that I'm supposed to do on my paying job here at the university. So finding that balance, I guess, was this week, is just making sure that the necessities definitely got done every day and that animals got checked the way they needed to.
Everybody got fed. And that's, sometimes just a challenge. Having two people can make all the difference in the world, as far as getting some tasks done.
Yeah, exactly. A second pair of hands it makes a lot of tasks significantly faster. It doesn't, sometimes you think one person does it this, so two people takes it half the time. Sometimes two people takes like a third of the time or even less. It just is that much more efficient. Certainly when we put out hay, if one person takes, wrapping off of those rolls, it's a lot faster than one person climbing up and climbing down doing it. That person can really drop a lot of time off of a process.
Yep.
So.
But, being down a person sometimes is just a challenge.
And for you guys down two people, it's probably an even more significant challenge. Yeah, I feel you there. The only other thing I'd say that was maybe a major accomplishment is that we did get our processing date scheduled for the spring. So something we had not done previously. Don't know why we had not done it previously, but we got that done. So we at least now have a target date when we're going to process a couple steers.
So we have been running low on some hamburger ourselves, and so we were going to take them off. We were supposed to be taken off this past weekend, and we ended up just saying, what, how much is it for you guys to come and pick them up? So we had them come pick up a heifer that had calf, the calf didn't make it, so we said, you're going to go turn it to hamburgers. So this was the reality of the situation. She didn't produce a calf, still a heifer, so we knew she's not over 24 months, really. So
right.
Went ahead and said hamburgers. We're low on the freezer.
Yep. That's not a bad plan. I think that's a reasonable approach. We're definitely right now figuring out, we're getting ready to sell our group that we weaned in the fall, planning for selling and figuring out which ones we're going to hold back to grow out longer. And a couple steers, because that's what we traditionally do, and how many heifers we're planning to keep into our herd potentially as replacements. But we also are thinking, because we've sometimes gotten hit pretty hard on replacement heifers that are unbred but larger. Sometimes we get paid well for them, sometimes we don't.
Huh.
Whether they might be something else that we could consider processing moving forward. So that's kind of an interesting discussion for another day. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely that time where we should start making our plans for some of those bigger animals, making sure we know when they're going to leave.
Get them scheduled out ahead of time, because really, I'm surprised you got a date even at this point.
Yeah, I am too, actually. I think things have slowed down a little bit. I think a couple things are happening. I think the market's a little bit trickier on freezer beef right now.
Yep.
But also, I think we have working relationships with the processors, so that helps. We consistently bring in 2 or 3 every 6 months, and they knew we were coming, but just figuring out what date that was going to be. So
okay.
So that's where we're at.
All right. So getting some stuff done, still making it.
We're still surviving. But the other thing I wanted to talk about today was hay quality, because we touched on all the feeding of hay we've been doing the last couple of weeks, but we missed sort of that fall season when a lot of times we talk about hay and hay storage and all of that, and how our hay quality was this year. And this was an interesting year for hay quality, I think. And I wish we'd brought in someone from maybe the forage group to talk about it, but in my opinion, we had unusual weather patterns. We had some dry early, but different areas of the state got different amounts of dryness in June. And then we got some rain again, and then we got more dry in the fall, basically across the whole state.
Yep.
And for us, we have most of our hay was first cutting hay. We filled our barns on first cutting. We weren't sure if that was a really dumb idea, sort of a weird risk management. Generally, a lot of people will say second or third cutting hays are a little bit cleaner and therefore more desirable. But we got a lot of decent hay in first cutting, and we got it into the barns pretty early. Got most of our barns actually filled before July, which for us is pretty good in this part of the state.
Yeah, because it was a challenge, that did get wet there in July. But I know for us, similarly, we had that really dry April, and we cut some of our hay early. So we had some fields that were looking fairly well. We cut them early, and then they rebounded fairly well for the second cutting for us. But then the third cutting was essentially, like you were saying, like a drought across the state, non-existent.
Yeah, and that's sort of what we found as well, is that we had very limited later hay. Plus, I had a baby, so like we were not motivated to try and take hay if there wasn't enough volume there to justify a field. Like you said before, when you're down people, you have to make decisions about what is practical
and essential.
And if it's really a thin stand, it may not be practical to take it. It may become a green fertilizer, green manure, however you want to describe it. So bush hog might be what you use. Or you could leave it stand, or you could graze it. I mean, all of those are options depending on where it is on a farm. So that's how we just approached it. Now, I will say, because we did our first cuttings earlier, we did we hay tested everything, the stuff we purchased, the stuff we baled. And I would say overall, our hay tests were very good this year.
Okay. What were you running for your crude protein thereabouts?
We were running anywhere from like 11 to 13%.
You're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
That'll support most of your cow-calves.
It'll absolutely... Everything up until heavy lactation is where we start to see a real requirement for some feed additions. Our relative feeding values, which are not really a great value to use on a grass hay, were solid for a grass hay.
Yeah.
As good as they're going to get. They're not going to be exceptional like they would on like an alfalfa, but those numbers were good. Our NDF, all of those numbers were sort of in line with where we would hope they would be, which means that we didn't have a lot of STEMI stuff happening, not a lot of really tough materials for the animals to eat. The only grasses that we have where we have some fibers that are really tough would be with our Johnson grasses that showed up in some of our second cutting hay. So as it got drier, we did see some more mature Johnson grass just because that was the only thing that was growing particularly well
at
that time of the year. So anything that we see that has a lot of Johnson grass, which is a visible thing for anyone looking at a bale of hay, because if you shine a headlight off of a truck on it, it just lights up. So Johnson grass is pretty easy to identify in a roll. You can see it during the daytime too, but at night it's really very simple to find them. Some of those rolls we might use for things like bale grazing or other spots where they're going to be in the field and we accept that wastage. We've been pretty intentional about not putting a lot of high Johnson grass bales into our feed lines where we're feeding on concrete because it's just more waste that we have to clean up at the end.
Yep.
We had some sort of processing equipment, we could probably force the cows to eat a little bit more of it, but they're just long and stemmy and they're just not that desirable.
Yeah, we do utilize the same approach. So we didn't test our hay this year, and I was thinking at this point we probably do need to test some of it because we generally know how it'll, about 10%-ish is what we generally run for our hay.
Yeah.
Just based on what we've done for prior years. And we'll try to feed our best materials, so we kind of keep separate location within the barns of what we feed in our lane, as opposed to some of our Johnson grass we'll actually store outside, knowing that it's going to be lower quality, net wrap it, and then put it out. Similar to you, put it out, let them tear it up. And those will be the ones we definitely use whenever it turns cold or we have that cold spell. Those are the bales we're just putting out there for them to tear up, to stay warm, to stay, to provide additional shelter and places to lie for the calves.
I think it's an interesting conversation because Johnson grass is actually nutritionally not a terrible grass, but it's when it gets a little bit more mature. And the trick with Johnson grass is it gets from a nice quality grass to over mature very fast.
Yep.
It just grows so quickly, especially if there's a rainfall event and it was right around when you were hoping to cut. You can all of a sudden just jump out of a healthy range for what animals are going to eat to something that's not so palatable to them.
And plus, you have the percentage. So then you'd have, when you do go out there and cut it, you might just have a couple, the Johnson grass, but the other grass isn't. Johnson grass ready to go, but the other grass isn't. Is also a challenge.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. That some of the other cooler season grasses are slightly immature if you're trying to get the Johnson grass at the right maturity. And you have to pick which grass you're going to target when you bale. And most people aren't targeting the Johnson grass in their fields. Although I know some people that do some stranger things than that.
So we're going to try, I think, in this past year, we were we were probably about a week away where it got so dry right there before it rained in July. We were getting ready to turn cows on hay pastures or hay fields. And so this year, I think we're working on, hopefully this upcoming spring at some point, boundary fences. So we're going to work on improving our boundary fences. And then so if there is a dry event, we can just turn them out. And it does seem like they do preferentially hit the Johnson grass first if you put them out into a hayfield to some degree. This might maybe be more of a anecdotal, but I do think it does seem like they do hit the Johnson grass areas first.
Well, I will say that we've put out like a sorghum Sudan, which is not exactly a Johnson grass, but it's not unrelated. And they will definitely hit that first, even over other grasses that are in those fields. And we always like to have a lot of clover in our fields, but that is almost always one of the last things that they eat when they are given choice. I'm not sure why that is. I don't understand the palatability choices of cows, but it is an interesting question. So.
And that is another thing for our pastures. We don't really see any Johnson grass primarily, but in the hay fields there is some patches, and so I was like, well, maybe if we put the cows out there, we'll hit them hard enough, and if we hit it frequently enough, maybe they can knock it down themselves.
Yeah, it's probably not a bad strategy from like a weed management, as if we could do some selective grazing by the cattle, intentionally. So, yeah.
But that's just something we thought about for this And we do try to prioritize our hay as well to some degree. So we do have a separate group of heifers, fall heifers that have calved, and so we'll give them whatever the highest quality hay we think is available.
Yeah, our animals that have calves on side right now are getting higher quality hays based upon our knowledge and the testing that we did on the hays. The other thing is they get some feed as well. So that group gets a little bit of both, where we know they're in pretty good lactation. And also, what's interesting is we're at the time of the year where those calves that came in the fall are really growing.
Yep.
And they are utilizing a lot of hay. So on some of our places where they're able to bale graze, those calves are sneaking in and getting to bales before the cows get in. So they're selectively breaking into the best bales and eating that. And they're doing exceptionally well on this system, although it's a little frustrating too to watch it happen some days. But it is interesting to see the dynamics, making sure that those calves do have access to enough hay, because this is a tough time of year for the cows to be in full lactation. So anything we can do to make the cows productive, but also make the calves productive without depending on the cows is a good thing.
And we do supplement. We do have, for the main group of mamas, we have the creep feeder out there for them.
For the calves too.
For the calves. Yeah. So we don't necessarily feed the cows, but we're feeding the calves to supplement.
I think I think people would say technically that is probably more efficient for putting weight onto calves, is to feed the calf.
And there's difference in philosophies. I know that some people don't like it because then the heifers might get a little too fatty, put down some fat deposits. It just depends on the management strategy, I think.
Yeah, and we have very limited feeding of feed to most of our cows, even those that have calves on their sides, because our hay has been really good this year. But on other years, we've had to feed every day for animals in lactation. This year, we're feeding about every other day to that group. But we also have a group of heifers and our old cows, and those get fed. They have feed out every day. Like, we just feed them much harder because that's the group that's going to struggle to rebreed.
Yep.
So they get a little bit of extra attention. We were able to separate them out. So they get the highest quality hays, and they're also getting feed on top of it. Something that they shouldn't need, in theory, if you look at a textbook, but something that they just, by the nature of where they're at in their cycle, do still need.
Oh yeah, but if you're going to get those animals to breed, they definitely need that extra attention.
So that's sort of where we're at. I'll also say that I don't know how your hay has been holding up. We haven't had huge amounts of wastage because we've been pretty intentional keeping Johnson grass out this year from our feeders, our feeding systems, where we scrape and stockpile our manure. We also scrape all the waste hay out of the same spot. Are you seeing a lot of waste hay in those bales, or are they eating it pretty well?
They're actually eating it fairly well this year. So they're eating most of it fairly well. We haven't had to clean out our feeder this past year, surprisingly. Last year we put mistakenly put a couple Johnson grass bales in there. We regretted it for a couple months because we weren't able to, because of some other challenges, equipment challenges. So when the skid steer went down. So this year it's been a lot easier. We put a higher quality hay in there, and it seems to be going fairly well for us. They're cleaning it up. Some of the stuff, it seems like they are pulling it out of the feed alley and into the area, so that we do have that little extra hay in the manure. And
right.
Some of the calves, conversely, when they do pull it out, the calves are using that area to lie down. So I can't complain too much.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. Yeah, we've been very happy this year. I don't think we've seen as much wastage with the hay that we've been feeding that we have in some other years as well. So I don't know if it's a characteristic of the weather patterns that we had, or when the bales got baled, if they got baled a little bit earlier this year, because we did have we had a pretty long dry spell in June.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people that might typically struggle to get hay up got hay up faster this year than they do typically. And that might have been the reason why, but it also could just be that the weather pattern changed what weeds were available in the spring.
Yep. Yeah, usually a lot of producers are trying to get everything up by July 4th. I think this year most of them were able to probably accomplish that because they did have ample opportunities in June.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually had ours, I think, finished in mid-June. And then we had this huge long stretch, and we're like, if we'd known we were going to have a 2-week stretch, we wouldn't have raced in early June to do things a week earlier than this. But, you live and you learn.
Yep, and you never know what tomorrow's going to bring. So
That's right.
Gotta play with the cards you're dealt.
That's right. So that's a little bit about our hay quality and how it's working out this year. So I think that's probably a pretty good summary. Let's just go ahead and give them an update on what we're planning to do next week on the farms.
Okay, so this upcoming week, we're still going to be hopefully repairing equipment. So we're taking apart one cutter bar, putting together another cutter bar, just getting everything ready for this upcoming year. So hopefully we can just go out there and cut.
Okay.
Would be the plan. So getting repairs done, general maintenance, organization. We're just doing a lot of wintertime activities, it seems like, right?
Like a good plan.
In addition to just putting out hay.
Yep, the standard putting out hay is still on the agenda this week. You're still going to feed your animals, huh?
Yeah, still got to do that. How about yourself?
Yeah, we'll also feed animals, try and keep them alive, the important things. We'll also be, my husband's traveling again this week, so planning out, getting everything set up for him to be on for a number of days and me to handle the feeding. And then the last thing that's pretty high on our list is we like typically to buy our diesel fuel here in early spring before we get into the summer months or over the winter. Last year we bought it in January. We're replacing some of our fuel storage with some newer tanks, used but new to us.
New to us, yeah.
Tanks. So getting those couple tanks set up, making sure that they are intact, that way we believe that they don't have any leaks in them, but making sure they don't have leaks before we bring fuel. All of that stuff this week is on our.
And you get the gravity feed, or are they going to be pump driven?
We have both.
Okay.
Gravity fed and pump driven, depending on where it's located. We have traditionally used some of the totes, the plastic totes, but they only have a limited lifespan because the fuel is pretty tough on some of the materials that are used on the connections there. It's not something you'd want to use for 20 or 30 years. It wouldn't be a practical, but it actually works really well for us from a running fuel out standpoint.
Yeah, feasibility.
It's because it's a really nice gravity feed system for us. So we're going to transition some of that over to some metal tanks, but that means that we do have to use the pump. We have pumps. It's not a huge problem, but it is a little more work to jump between.
Yeah, we do have some of the old-fashioned hand pumps, and I think we've gone through 2 or 3 of those hand pumps. Like, man, gravity never fails.
Yeah. We have actually on one of our farm trucks, we have additional fuel. So the truck is actually a gas truck, but we have a diesel fuel supplemental storage on the truck, and it's a hand pump rather than an electronic pump. And I don't know if that was the right decision or not. It was definitely more cost effective than putting on an electric pump onto the back of the truck. But it is extremely convenient for filling up tractors in the field.
Yes.
It was not a bad decision when we built it, although it's a little bit cumbersome just to have all that space taken up
fuel tank
by a fuel tank on the truck. So that's on the list for the next couple weeks, is figuring out when the fuel price is going to be acceptable and that we have enough money that we can afford to fill the diesel tanks up again.
Yeah, it's always balancing out. It's a balancing act. I guess you sell some animals, buy some fuel, sell some animals, buy some fertilizer.
Yes, that's what we will be doing. We will be selling some animals and buying some fuel this year. So
okay, and we'll see what happens with fertilizer and everything else this year too, because it's always a challenge. Because predicting, like you said, the fuel is like it's going to go up. I'm assuming it's just going to go up. But
I think most things are not going down significantly. But right now the fuel prices are bouncing around a little bit. So just making sure we aren't careless about it and paying attention to what the fuel prices are doing. But in the next few weeks, it will definitely be on our agenda to purchase fuel for the year.
All right.
That's what we're planning on. We will see you guys next week with another episode.
Take care.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.